and welcome. I'm Dr. Sushil Perez, and today we're going to talk about effective introductory paragraphs. If you clicked on this module, more than likely you've just been assigned an essay, and you want to make sure to write the most effective and engaging essay possible. And effective, engaging essays begin with effective introductory paragraphs and good leads. A good lead hooks the reader by heightening their curiosity and arousing their interest. The best lead drops the reader into the middle of the action. They literally pick up the reader by the scruff of their necks and drop them into the heart of conflict. Let's consider these two examples. At times it appeared that we were surmounting an impassable obstacle. However, through the camaraderie and the solidarity of our aquatics team, we triumphed over our defeats and inevitably reached the pennant of victory. Now let's take a look at the second example. Back in July, my friends made fun of me when I told them that I was going to start a swim team. Laughing, they told me to return to my math problems. Today, standing in the limelight, I look over at my teammates and can't help but marvel at how far we've come. Now I have a pretty good idea of which one you might find more engaging and which one draws you closer to the author. Although this first example about surmounting obstacles crams in a lot of what we would consider academic words and words that most students would imagine make their essay more engaging, it in fact actually makes it more confusing because we don't know anything about the author, and what's more important, we kind of don't want to. Now, the second example, I would imagine you would agree, is more engaging because we know something about the author in this one. We know, for example, that perhaps he's not an athletic person naturally. He might be more inclined to math. But regardless of that, he decided to do something like begin a swim team. And even though he had to overcome some obstacles, we can expect an essay about triumph. As we all know, a good introduction can make or break the essay. Because it's the first thing the reader sees, it will either capture their attention or lose their interest. And that we don't want. A good introduction sets the scene and establishes the tone of the essay and gives a clear idea of what the essay is about. When you begin to write your lead, sentence, and introductory paragraph, make sure to be very deliberate about your word choice. Choose active words rather than passive ones. Create anecdotes when possible, which are short stories. Use emotion and detail. Words to throw out of an introductory paragraph would include, in my opinion, I think, I believe. All of these words are embedded. The entire essay represents what you believe. Therefore, you don't really have to use those words because the whole essay are your words. All of it is your opinion and your belief. Phrases and words to avoid. Avoid using rhetorical questions, worn-out phrases, and slang. As we know, rhetorical questions are questions that we're not expected to respond, which also means that we're probably not expected to be engaged. Also avoid using trite phrases such as moment of truth, last-ditch effort, because these are predictable and again, don't require much engagement. Avoid using slang unless the slang is coupled with some very witty phrase. Do, however, create thought-provoking questions like this next one that we're going to look at. Most teens have money to spend thanks to an allowance or after-school job. But do they have the money management skills to go along with that income? This question is not rhetorical. It's asking the reader to think about some assumptions that they might have about teens and then to ponder about whether or not teens have the money management skills that they would need. Now let's look at this TED Talk video and see what good introductions might sound like.
If I should have a daughter, instead of mom, she's gonna call me Point B. Because that way she knows that no matter what happens, At least she can always find her way to me. And I'm going to paint the solar systems on the backs of her hands. So she has to learn the entire universe before she can say, oh, I know that like the back of my hand. And she's going to learn that this life will hit you hard in the face. Wait for you to get back up just so it can kick you in the stomach. But getting the wind knocked out of you is the only way to remind your lungs how much they like the taste of air.
As I hope you agree, Sarah Kay's introduction to her talk and about her metamorphosis from poet to teacher is engaging because we're drawn into her story. So now let's talk about some effective leads in a little bit more detail. This is the anecdote, similar to what we just witnessed. An anecdote is a personal story that is related to the topic of your essay. It may be true or possibly true, but should be entirely believable. The purpose of the story is to get your reader ready for your essay, not to make them confused. So let's read this example. The remains of Thanksgiving dinner sat like an abandoned wreck on the dining room table. She had eaten it all, and the guests hadn't even arrived yet. This would have to stop. The words above promise humor and pathos, emotions. But it's that abandoned wreck image, which is the climax of the story, that gives this lead immediate energy and therefore draws us in. Now let's look at the second effective lead. We can consider this a fact opener or a surprising statement. Cigarette smoke has been called a lethal cocktail of paint stripper, toilet bowl cleaner, lighter fluid, mothball chemicals, death chamber poison, and rocket fuel. I think most of you will agree that if nothing else, this is shocking and grabs our attention. The next effective lead that we're going to look at is done through vivid descriptions. Until a disaster catches a community off guard, most people never stop to think about what they would need to survive, away from the comforts of home. Vivid descriptions like this one can be especially compelling, since we are intrigued and perhaps even moved. The fourth effective lead tends to be a little bit longer, but gives us vital background knowledge about an important topic. In this one, for example, we're given information about Brown versus Board of Education. The victory brought pure elation and joy. It was May 1954, just days after the Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. At the NAACP headquarters in New York, the mood was euphoric. Telegrams of congratulations poured in from around the world. Reporters and well-wishers, crowded the halls. This lead, as you can see, is effective because it provides us with background knowledge that perhaps we didn't already know, specific dates as to the Supreme Court hearing, but it also brings us in by using emotive language and shows us, not just tells us, what the mood was like. Which leads me to the second point, showing in writing. Perhaps Mark Twain explained it best. Don't just say the old lady screamed. Bring her on and let her scream. So show your audiences what you mean. Important concepts to think about when you're writing to show and not tell is make sure that your idea developments are chosen through memorable details, that you create voice in the essay by conveying emotion, mood, and tone, and that you choose your words wisely, choosing verbs and adjectives that are, again, memorable. In this next slide, we see a show, don't tell example by Joan Didion, one of the most renowned essayists of our time. There is something uneasy in the Los Angeles air this afternoon, some unnatural stillness, some tension. We know it because we feel it. The baby frets, the maid sulks. I rekindle a waning argument with the telephone company, then cut my losses and lie down, given over to whatever it is in the air. To live with a Santa Ana is to accept, consciously or unconsciously, a deeply mechanistic view of human behavior. This introduction works because the author shows us, not just tells us, what the Santa Ana winds feel like. After the effective lead comes preparation for your thesis statement. Before writing a thesis statement, you must be aware of your audience and purpose. Make sure that you've read the prompt that's been assigned to you carefully. You must begin with a topic question if it's not already provided for you. So turn the prompt into a question for yourself, one that you have to decide about. Form an opinion and state it clearly. Do not be wishy-washy. Consider both sides of a controversial issue, but make sure to pick just one. A good thesis statement is limited to one main idea. A good example would include, the key to successful dieting is focusing on a specific goal. A bad example would be, the key to successful dieting is focusing on a specific goal, which is also the key to successfully running a business and coaching a football team. Now this last one doesn't work because we don't really know what the main idea is. We don't know whether we're going to be reading an essay about successful dieting, running, or coaching. Another good example would be, success is the result of doing the right things consistently. A bad example would be, in a world full of success gurus and books about success, it becomes ever so more important to delineate the one trait that ultimately determines success, doing the right things consistently. Again, the second lead is too wordy and doesn't engage the reader, rather confuses the issue. Now we're going to look at how to put your lead, transition, and thesis statement into the introductory paragraph. So the introductory paragraph should include a lead or hook. It could be an anecdote, a description, an illustration, narration, or dialogue that pulls the reader into your paper topic. It should be interesting and specific. Then there should be a transition sentence. Basically, that sentence connects the lead with the thesis, and we're going to see a little bit more of that in a second. And then your thesis statement, which should be about 1 or 2 sentences that summarizes the overall point of the paper. The transition sentence bridges the gap between a lighthearted anecdote and the serious thesis statement. The first half of the sentence should contain something from the lead or the anecdote, and the second half of that same sentence should contain something from the thesis. Let's look at what that would look like. For example, don't write, secondhand smoke is bad and can cause heart disease and cancer. Therefore, smoking should be outlawed in public places. But allowing smoking is unfair to smokers, so maybe non-smokers can just hold their breath or wear masks around smokers instead. This is a wishy-washy statement. It's puzzling and confusing. We don't know whether you're for or against smoking laws. Is it the Yankees or the Mets? Mets or Yankees? So pick a side and stick with it, and then stick up for it. Do write that secondhand smoke coming from that table next to you or from that one person in the house who refuses to smoke outside is just as harmful as smoking and leads to a higher prevalence of cancer and heart disease. This is my lead sentence. It's effective because it begins in the heart of the action and gives the reader some background. The second sentence is a transition. What's worse? People who inhale secondhand smoke are doing so without consent. And the last sentence, which I've color-coded in red, is a thesis. For this reason, smoking in any public space should be banned. Let's look at one more example. Another lead transition thesis example. The lead in this case would be, people paid more attention to the way I talked than what I said, exclaimed the woman from Brooklyn in New York in the movie American Tongues. The transition sentence might read like this. This young woman's home dialect interferes with people taking her seriously because they see her as a cartoonish stereotype of a New Yorker, which sets the reader for the thesis statement. This type of judgment can even cause some to be ashamed of or try to change their language identity. As part of this module, I've created a writing checklist for this and future essays to come. Please confer to this list and make sure that you can check off each of the points listed here before you turn in essays. Some of these include: open the essay with a great lead, used an anecdote, used examples. The more specific, the more impact it will have. The second part of the document also contains more writing don'ts and tips, along with some common errors to avoid. Now, let's write. Revisit that essay, which might have seemed daunting, but which now we both know you can tackle. Make sure that you begin with a good lead, one that's only 1 to 3 sentences, that there's a transition sentence, which hooks the lead with a thesis statement. And finally, make sure that you've created a thesis statement which is clear and concise. Also included in this module are resources for critical analysis essays and some food for thought and topics for future essays. Thank you for your time and attention. I'm confident that you're going to create an effective and engaging essay.